Andrew Brunson, U.S. pastor leaves Turkey after release. A U.S. pastor has left Turkey after more than 2 years in detention in a case that badly strained ties with the U.S. Andrew Brunson flew out from the western city of Izmir, reports said. Earlier, a court sentenced him to 3 years in jail on terror charges, but he was released because of the time he had already been detained. He was arrested over alleged links to political groups, including the banned Gulenist movement, after a failed coup attempt in 2016. Additional espionage charges against him were dropped. "This is the day our family has been praying for. I am delighted to be on my way home to the United States," Mr. Brunson said in a statement. "My entire family thanks the President, the administration, and Congress for their unwavering support," he added. What was he accused of? Mr. Brunson lived in Turkey with his wife and 3 children for more than 20 years, most of it working for the small Izmir Resurrection Church, which had a congregation of about 24 people. He was arrested in October 2016. The authorities accused him of having links with the outlawed Kurdistan Workers' Party, PKK, and the Gulenist movement, which Turkey blames for the 2016 failed coup. He also faced up to 35 years in jail on charges of espionage. In July 2018 he was released from prison for health reasons and moved to house arrest until his trial. A few weeks later, the U.S. imposed sanctions on Turkey's Justice and Interior ministers over his continued detention. Mr. Brunson and U.S. officials insisted he is innocent of all charges. Ahead of the court's decision, U.S. broadcaster NBC reported that Turkey and the U.S. had reached a secret deal for Mr. Brunson to be released in exchange for the U.S. easing sanctions. What happened in court? Dressed in a black suit, white shirt and red tie, Mr. Brunson, who was one of 20 Americans charged after the coup attempt 2 years ago, told the court he was an innocent man. "I love Jesus. I love Turkey," he said. The pastor was convicted on charges of aiding terror groups while not being a member of them, and sentenced to 3 years in prison. The court took into account the time he had already spent in detention, lifting his house arrest and overseas travel ban. When the verdict was read out, he wept and hugged his wife Noreen. Pressure was too much. By Mark Lowen, BBC Turkey correspondent. President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has always insisted that he could not meddle with Turkey's judicial independence and that only the courts would decide Pastor Brunson's fate. But the World Economic Forum places Turkey 103rd of 137 countries in the independent judiciary rankings, and Turkey watchers knew it would always come down to a political decision. In the end, pressure from Washington on Ankara was too much. Sanctions, trade tariffs and the threat of more had led U.S.-Turkey relations to nosedive, and with them, the Turkish lira. Facing spiraling inflation, a 40% drop in the value of the currency and the start of an economic crisis, Turkey had to act to normalize relations with the U.S. Mr. Brunson was the key. Andrew Brunson had the American government behind him. Deniz Yücel, the former correspondent of Die Welt, who was imprisoned and then finally freed in Turkey, had the German government supporting him. Tens of thousands of others here who claim wrongful imprisonment don't have the backing of a powerful state to resist what they say is Turkey's politicized judiciary. Why is it significant? Pastor Brunson's detention has soured relations between Washington and Ankara, who are allies in NATO, with both sides imposing sanctions on the other. President Recep Tayyip blames Muslim cleric Fethullah Gulen for the attempted coup, but Mr. Gulen, who is based in Pennsylvania, denies any involvement. Turkey wants the U.S. to agree to his extradition. U.S. support for Kurdish forces fighting the Syrian civil war has also angered Mr. Erdogan, who views them as an extension of the PKK. The PKK, a Turkish Kurdish rebel group fighting for autonomy since the 1980s, is considered a terrorist group by Turkey and the U.S. But in recent weeks, Mr. Erdogan said he hoped to rebuild relations with Washington with the spirit of strategic partnership. More than 50,000 people were arrested in Turkey in President Erdogan's huge post-coup crackdown,